All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to do a complete whiteboard breakdown of what is honestly one of history's most sprawling, devastating, and let's face it, totally underappreciated conflicts. We're going to map out this incredible story of shifting empires and towering ambitions, complete with a few stick figure kings and generals drawn in along the way, just to make this massive puzzle crystal clear. So, you might be wondering, was World War I actually the first World War? I'm going to hook you right now by proposing that no, it wasn't. The actual first global conflict happened over 150 years earlier. It literally dragged 3 continents into this bloody domino effect, and it completely reshaped the modern world as we know it today. Yep, we're talking about the 7 Years' War. So here's our battle plan for the day. First, we're setting the stage with the First Real World War. Second, the diplomatic revolution. Third, a war across 3 continents. Fourth, miracles and treaties. And finally, number 5, seeds of future revolutions. Stick with me and we'll make this incredibly complex web of alliances completely clear. Okay, Section 1. The First Real World War. Setting the stage. We're jumping right into the mid-1700s. And this was a massive transition period, Small, aristocratic cabinet squabbles were suddenly overshadowed by massive, all-consuming state wars. Just picture Europe right now as a giant, highly unstable powder keg. The major powers are all fiercely vying for global dominance. You've got Great Britain ruling the waves and funneling immense wealth from its colonies. Then you have France, deeply in debt from the previous reign of the Sun King, Louis XIV, but they're still fiercely competing with Britain overseas. Over in Central Europe, you have the Kingdom of Prussia, led by Friedrich II, who has this highly disciplined army and, quite frankly, a huge appetite for Austrian territory. And speaking of Austria, the Habsburg monarchy under Maria Theresa is desperately trying to hold its vast, diverse empire together, all while a rapidly expanding Russian empire looks to push its weight westward. It was a wildly precarious balance. Literally every single decision threatened to tip the scales. Moving right along to Section 2, the diplomatic revolution, flipping the board. To shift this super fragile balance of power, Europe underwent a dizzying geopolitical realignment that basically threw the old rulebook right out the window. We call this the diplomatic revolution of 1756. Basically, the desperate need for security and territory caused bitter, centuries-old enemies to suddenly become best friends. It was a massive strategic reshuffle. Think about it like this. Traditionally, Austria and Britain were allies. But Austria desperately wanted to reclaim the territory of Silesia from Prussia, so they sought a stronger partner and teamed up with their absolute oldest rival, France. I mean, crazy, right? In response, Britain desperately needed to protect the electorate of Hanover on the continent, which was ruled by the British king. So Britain partners up with the rising military powerhouse of Prussia. Old enemies became allies, and former allies turned into adversaries overnight. And here is the spark. In August 1756, King Friedrich II of Prussia sees this massive coalition forming against him, and he makes a really bold, aggressive gamble. He preemptively invades the neutral territory of Saxony to secure its resources and create a buffer zone. This bold strike triggers widespread panic. Austria feels threatened, France gets drawn in through their brand new alliance, Russia prepares to march, and Britain backs Prussia. Boom! The powder keg had officially ignited. Which brings us to Section 3, a war across 3 continents, the dominoes fall. This European dynastic squabble immediately bleeds into the colonies, and the dominoes start falling globally. In North America, British and French territorial claims clashed hard in the Ohio River Valley. And, fun fact from our sources here, the whole French and Indian War practically kicked off because a young George Washington had a Dutch interpreter who accidentally mistranslated a surrender document, essentially admitting to the assassination of a French officer. Crazy. Meanwhile, over in India, Britain and France were fighting the Carnatic Wars for control. Down in the Caribbean, they're having massive naval clashes over incredibly lucrative sugar islands. And over in West Africa, Britain was actually capturing French trading posts like Senegal to disrupt the slave trade routes vital to the French economy. It was truly a global struggle. If we zoom in on North America, the British devised a very specific multi-step strategy to crush French colonial power, championed by William Pitt. Step 1, capture the fortress of Louisbourg to open up the St. Lawrence River. Step 2, take Fort Duquesne to control the Ohio Valley. And Step 3, the ultimate prize, Quebec City. This whole strategy culminated in a wildly risky maneuver where British General James Wolfe literally had his soldiers scale steep cliffs in the dead of night to surprise the French at Quebec on the Plains of Abraham. It worked, though unfortunately both commanders tragically perished in the battle. Because of masterstrokes like that, 1759 became known as the Annus Mirabilis, or the wonderful year for Great Britain. They enjoyed stunning, sweeping victories. I mean, they captured Quebec, they completely broke French influence in the Carnatic region of India, and they secured critical naval victories that totally eliminated any hope of a French invasion of the British Isles. Britain was absolutely dominating.
Okay, Section 4. Miracles and treaties, narrow escapes, and peace.
Now, while Britain was out there thriving overseas, their ally Prussia was getting absolutely hammered back on the continent and required incredible strokes of luck just to survive. At the Battle of Kunarsdorf, King Friedrich II launched what he thought was a brilliant flanking assault against the Austro-Russian coalition. Instead, he was met by entrenched artillery and suffered a catastrophic defeat, losing 19,000 men in a single day. Just imagine our whiteboard stick figure Friedrich here, his army in total ruins, completely despondent as the coalition forces prepare to march directly on his capital of Berlin. He needed a literal miracle. Amazingly, he actually got two of them. In 1759, we see the first miracle of the House of Brandenburg. The Austro-Russian army, despite their massive victory, just stalls out due to horrible logistics and bickering commanders, and they actually withdraw instead of taking Berlin. Then, in January 1762, we get the second miracle. Tsarina Elizabeth of Russia, who was Friedrich's absolute fiercest enemy, suddenly dies. Her successor, Peter III, is a massive fanboy of Friedrich. He immediately orders a ceasefire and withdraws Russia from the war entirely. This incredible stroke of luck saved Prussia, eventually leading to the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Hubert-Dousburg in February 1763, which finally brought all the fighting to a close. But we really can't just gloss over the cost of all this. 762,000. That is the staggering number of casualties suffered by the Habsburg coalition alone over the course of this conflict. It's a sobering number, and it really grounds us in the devastating human toll of 18th century warfare. Entire regions like Saxony were just completely plundered and ruined. Finally, Section 5, Seeds of Future Revolutions. The irony of victory. The ultimate irony of this massive global conflict is that the winners basically planted the seeds for their own future destruction. Everyone paid a crushing price. Britain gained global dominance and vast territories, but their national debt literally doubled. France was humiliated, losing colonies and shattering their economy. Prussia survived and kept Silesia, but had to heavily tax their lower classes to do it. And we absolutely cannot forget the Native Americans, who were entirely marginalized. French diplomatic customs like gift-giving were suddenly cut off by the British, and settler incursions continued, which directly forced indigenous nations into open rebellion, most notably under the Ottawa chief Pontiac. Let's look at the specific cost for Britain. To pay off that doubled national debt and fund the troops fighting Pontiac's rebellion on the frontier, Britain imposed new taxes and trade regulations on the American colonies. The colonists, who had just bled to win this territory, were furious about paying these taxes without representation in Parliament. Furthermore, Britain issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which restricted westward expansion to appease native tribes, essentially gatekeeping the very land the colonists felt they had just fought for. The ideological divide was firmly set. And over on the continent, the irony is just as tragic for France. Their massive failure in the 7 Years' War left them with crippling war debts and a devastating loss of national prestige. As the king struggled to reform a bankrupt and battered kingdom, the deep economic strain sowed the direct seeds of discontent that just a few decades later would erupt into the violence of the French Revolution. So, I'm going to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought to chew on. Would the American Revolution and the French Revolution have ever happened without the financial ruin and the colonial friction caused by this forgotten global war? It really makes you ponder how deeply connected these historical dominoes truly are. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.